There are sounds that live in the spaces between heartbeats, voices that speak only to those brave enough to listen in the dark. Have you checked if you're subscribed to the channel? And tell me from which city you're listening to this story. Lyra had always heard things others couldn't. As a child, she would stop mid-step in the village square, her head tilted, listening to something no one else perceived. Her mother would pull her along, embarrassed, whispering that she needed to stop making a spectacle of herself. But Lyra couldn't help it. The sounds were there as real as thunder or bird song, and ignoring them felt like pretending the sky wasn't blue. She heard the whispers of old stones, the memories they carried of hands that had shaped them centuries ago. She heard the songs of rivers, melodies that changed with the seasons and the weather. She heard the grief of abandoned places, the echo of lives once lived in houses, now empty. And sometimes on nights when the wind blew from the north and the moon was dark, she heard something else. Something that made her blood run cold and her heart race with a fear she couldn't name. A howl, but not the howl of any wolf or dog she had ever known. This was deeper, older, carrying a weight that seemed to press against her chest like a physical thing. It spoke of loneliness so profound it had become its own entity, of longing that had outlasted the one who felt it, of a call sent into darkness with no hope of answer. Lyra grew up in a village called Thornhaven, nestled in a valley where the winters were long and the summers brief. The people there were practical, focused on survival, on getting through another harsh season. They had no time for dreamers, for those who claimed to hear things that weren't there. Lyra learned early to keep her gift quiet, to nod and smile when others spoke, to pretend the world was as simple and silent as they believed it to be. Her father was a woodworker, a quiet man who shaped beauty from raw timber, creating furniture and tools that would outlast him. He understood in his way that there was more to the world than what could be seen. He would sometimes pause in his work, running his hand over a piece of wood, and say, "This tree has a story. Can you hear it?" And Lyra would nod, because she could. She could hear the years of growth, the storms weathered, the birds that had nested in its branches, all compressed into the grain and texture of the wood. Her mother was different. She had been beautiful once, Lyra knew from old portraits, but life had worn her down, made her sharp and brittle. She wanted normal children, a normal life, normal problems. Lyra's strangeness frightened her, made her angry in a way she couldn't articulate. So she pretended it didn't exist, corrected Lyra when she spoke of the things she heard, punished her when she wouldn't stop. By the time Lyra was 15, she had learned to live in two worlds. The outer world, where she worked in her father's shop, helped with chores, attended the village festivals, and pretended to be just like everyone else. And the inner world, where the sounds were, where the truth lived, where she was most herself. The howl came on her 18th birthday. She was lying in bed, unable to sleep, listening to the house settle around her, the familiar creaks and whispers. And then, cutting through everything else, came that sound, closer than she had ever heard it before, so close she could feel it vibrating in her bones. She sat up, her heart pounding. The howl came again, and this time she heard something new in it. Not just loneliness and longing, but recognition, as if whoever or whatever was making that sound knew she was listening, as if it was calling specifically to her. Lyra rose from her bed, pulled on a heavy cloak over her nightgown, and slipped out of her room. The house was dark and quiet. Her parents were asleep. She moved like a ghost through the familiar spaces, out the door, into the night. The village was silent. Everyone walked safely in their homes. The moon was a sliver of silver in the sky, providing barely enough light to see by. Lyra stood in the empty street, listening, waiting. The howl came from the north, from the forest that bordered the village, the ancient woods that everyone said were dangerous, where children were told never to venture alone. Lyra had been in those woods many times, had heard their secrets, their songs. They didn't frighten her. Or rather they did, but fear had never stopped her before. She walked toward the tree line, her feet finding the path by memory and instinct. The howl sounded again, guiding her, pulling her forward like a rope tied around her waist. She entered the forest and the darkness swallowed her, thick and complete. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She walked for what felt like hours, though time became strange in the woods, elastic and unreliable. The howl continued, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always ahead of her, leading her deeper. The trees grew taller, older, their trunks wide as houses. The ground became rough, rocky, climbing steadily upward. And then, abruptly, the forest ended. Lyra stepped out onto a plateau, a flat expanse of stone that jutted from the mountainside like a shelf, and in the center of that plateau stood ruins. Not the ruins of a house or even a manor. These were the remains of something far grander. Walls of black stone still standing in places, covered with carvings worn almost smooth by time and weather. Pillars that must have once supported a roof now open to the sky. And in the very center, a structure that was more intact than the rest, a kind of chamber or shrine, its doorway a dark mouth leading into shadow. The howl came from inside. Lyra approached slowly, every instinct she had screaming at her to turn back, to run, to return to the safety of her bed and pretend this night had never happened. But she had come too far. She had to know. She stepped through the doorway into darkness. Her eyes adjusted slowly, revealing a chamber lit by faint phosphorescence from moss growing on the walls, casting everything in an eerie blue-green glow. The air was so cold she could see her breath misting before her, each exhalation a small cloud that dissipated slowly. And in the center of the chamber, lying on a raised stone platform, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, was a man. No, not a man. The shape was human, but everything else was wrong. He was covered in frost, a thick layer of ice that clung to his skin, his hair, his clothes like a second skin. The ice wasn't smooth. It was crystalline, faceted, catching the dim light and breaking it into fragments. His eyes were closed, the lashes white with frost. His lips were blue. His chest didn't rise with breath. He looked like a statue carved from ice and flesh, beautiful and terrible and utterly still. A work of art created by someone who understood both perfection and cruelty. But he was the source of the howl. Lyra could feel it emanating from him, not from his frozen throat, but from somewhere deeper, from his very essence. It was a sound that existed on a level beyond normal hearing, a vibration in the air and earth and stone that resonated in her bones. A call sent out endlessly into the void, hoping for an answer that never came, a scream of loneliness so profound it had become its own entity. She stood frozen herself, unable to move, unable to look away. Part of her wanted to run, to flee this place and never look back, to pretend she had never heard the howl, never followed it, never found this chamber of horrors. But another part, the part that had always been drawn to broken things, that had spent her childhood trying to piece together shattered pottery, couldn't leave, wouldn't leave. She moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name, compulsion, destiny, the inevitable pull of one flame toward another, though she didn't know that's what it was yet. Each step felt both voluntary and inevitable, as if she was walking a path that had been laid out for her long before she was born. Up close she could see more details. The way the ice had formed patterns on his skin, fractals that spiraled inward toward his heart. The way his hair, dark beneath the frost, fell across his forehead. The way his hands, resting on his chest, were positioned as if holding something, though nothing was there. He looked young, though it was hard to tell with the ice obscuring so much, mid-20s perhaps. Too young to have earned whatever punishment this was. She reached out, her hand trembling, and touched his hand. The moment her fingers made contact with his frozen skin, everything changed. Warmth flooded through her, not from him, but from within herself, a heat she had never felt before, never known she possessed, never even imagined existed. It was like discovering she had an entirely new sense, a way of perceiving the world that had always been there, but dormant, waiting for this exact moment to activate. The warmth poured down her arm through her hand into him, and the ice began to melt. It happened slowly at first, drops of water forming on his skin where her hand touched, running down his fingers to pool on the stone platform. Then faster, the frost cracking like eggshell, falling away in sheets that shattered when they hit the ground. Color returned to his face, faint at first, just the barest hint of pink in his cheeks, then stronger, spreading outward from where she touched him. The blue faded from his lips. The white receded from his lashes, and his chest moved. A shallow breath, barely perceptible, then another, then a gasp as his lungs remembered their purpose. His eyes flew open. They were silver, completely silver, no iris, no pupil, just that metallic gleam that caught the phosphorescent light and reflected it back, amplified. They were the most inhuman thing about him, those eyes, beautiful and terrible, and wrong in a way that made Lyra's stomach clench. But they were also alive, brilliantly, desperately alive. He stared at her, those impossible eyes wide with shock and something else. Disbelief, wonder, hope so desperate and fragile, it looked like it might shatter if she breathed wrong. "You came," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse, each word clearly painful, barely more than a breath that barely carried across the small space between them. "After all this time, after all the years, after I'd given up hope, you finally came." Lyra wanted to speak, to ask who he was, what this place was, how long he had been here, why he was frozen, what had happened to make this necessary. But her voice wouldn't work. The warmth was still flowing from her, and she realized with growing alarm that she couldn't stop it. It was pouring out of her like water from a broken dam, inexorable and unstoppable, and if she didn't find a way to control it, it would drain her completely, leave her an empty husk. She tried to pull her hand back, but his fingers closed around hers, gentle but firm, with surprising strength for someone who had just woken from what looked like death. "Don't," he said, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Please, not yet. I've been cold for so long, so long. I'd forgotten what warmth felt like. I'd forgotten that anything existed besides the ice and the silence and the endless, endless waiting. Just a little longer, please. Who are you? Lyra managed to ask, her voice shaking, each word an effort. I am Kael, or I was. I don't know what I am anymore. I don't even know if I'm still real, or if this is another hallucination, another dream that will dissolve when I try to hold on to it. He sat up slowly, stiffly, as if his body had forgotten how to move, each motion deliberate and uncertain. Ice fell from him in chunks, shattering on the stone. How long has it been? Please, tell me. How long since they locked me here? How long since I've seen the sun? I don't know, Lyra said honestly. I don't even know who they are. I don't know what this place is or why you're here. I just heard you calling. I heard the howl. I followed the sound. He looked at her with an expression of such profound wonder that it made her chest ache, made her eyes burn with tears. She didn't understand. You heard me. No one has heard me in. I don't even know how long. Decades? Centuries, maybe? I called and called, and no one came. No one listened. I thought I would be here forever, frozen, aware, but unable to move or speak or die, conscious through every moment of every year. A punishment worse than death, worse than anything I could have imagined. What did you do? Lyra asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. What could anyone do to deserve this? Kael laughed, a bitter sound that had no humor in it, just pain and resignation and old, old anger. I was born. That was my crime. I was born with a flame inside me, a fire that marks some and not others, that makes us different, makes us powerful, makes us dangerous. And I was born as the heir to a kingdom that feared the flame above all else, that had built its entire culture around suppressing it, controlling it, eliminating it, wherever it appeared. So they gave me a choice when I came of age: suppress the flame forever, deny what I was, live a lie, rule as a normal king would rule, or embrace it and face exile. I chose exile. I chose to be myself, and they chose to make sure I could never come back, chose to make an example of me that would terrify any other bearer who thought about defying them. They froze you, Lyra said, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. They did more than that. They marked me. He pulled back his sleeve with his free hand, the motion slow and awkward. His arm was still partially covered in frost, but beneath it, on his forearm, she could see his skin. And there, burned or branded into the flesh, was a symbol. It was complex, layered, made of lines that seemed to shift and writhe when she looked at them directly. The flesh around it was pale and scarred, as if the mark itself had done damage just by existing. As Lyra watched, the symbol began to glow faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat, responding to the warmth flowing from her hand. This mark is a seal. It binds my flame, keeps it locked away so deep I can barely feel it, can barely remember what it felt like to use it freely. And it keeps me here, tied to this place, unable to leave even if the ice melted, unless someone breaks the seal. How do you break it? Lyra asked, though she thought she already knew, could feel the answer in the way the mark pulsed, in the way it seemed to be reaching toward her warmth like a plant toward sunlight. With fire, Kael said, meeting her eyes. With a flame stronger than the one that created it, one that comes from someone willing to give freely what I cannot take. with someone willing to share their warmth even when it costs them everything, even when it might destroy them. The mark was designed to be unbreakable, to last forever. But whoever created it didn't account for one thing. What? That someone might care enough to try anyway. He looked at her hand, still touching his, still radiating that impossible heat that was draining her even as it freed him. And Lyra understood. The warmth flowing from her wasn't just warmth. It was her flame. The fire she had carried her whole life without knowing what it was, without understanding that the sounds she heard, the voices in stones and water and wood, were all manifestations of something larger, something fundamental to her nature. Activated by contact with another bearer, it was responding to his need the way iron responds to a magnet, the way water flows downhill, inevitable and natural. "I'm a bearer," she said, the words feeling strange on her tongue, foreign and familiar at the same time. "Like you. I have a flame." "Yes," Kael confirmed, and there was something like joy in his voice, fragile and tentative. "Though you didn't know it until now." Most don't, unless they encounter another bearer or unless their flame is triggered by extreme emotion or desperate need. But you have it. I can feel it. It's strong. Stronger than mine ever was, even before they sealed me. Your flame is different, unique. I've never felt anything like it. What happens if I break the seal?" Lyra asked, needing to understand what she was committing to before she went any further. "I don't know," Kael admitted, and his honesty was somehow more reassuring than any promise would have been. "I'll be free, certainly. The frost will melt completely. The binding will release. I'll be able to leave this place. But there may be consequences. The seal was created by powerful people who feared what I might become, who had the resources and the will to imprison me for eternity. Breaking it could alert them that I'm awake, that someone freed me, could bring them here, could put you in danger, could put anyone you've ever cared about in danger." "And if I don't break it?" Lyra asked, though she already knew this answer too. "Then I stay here. And eventually you'll run out of warmth to give, and you'll freeze too. The seal takes what it's offered, but it's never satisfied. It will consume you if you let it, drain you dry and leave you as frozen as I am. We'll both be trapped here, aware but unable to act, for however long the world lasts. That's what the seal does. That's what it was designed to do." Lyra looked at him, really looked at him. He was young, or at least appeared young, perhaps a few years older than she was. His hair was dark, still wet from melted ice, hanging in his eyes. His face was lean, angular, marked by suffering but not broken by it. And those silver eyes held such hope, such desperate need, that she knew she couldn't walk away even if she wanted to. "Tell me how to break it," she said. "Are you sure? Once you start, you can't stop. It will take everything you have. You might die, I'm sure." Kael studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Place your other hand on the mark. Focus on the warmth inside you, the flame. Don't try to control it or direct it. Just let it flow. Let it do what it knows how to do." Lyra placed her free hand over the mark on his arm. The moment she touched it, she felt resistance like pushing against a wall made of ice. The mark was cold, far colder than the rest of him, so cold it burned. But she didn't pull away. She closed her eyes and focused inward, searching for the source of the warmth, and found it. Deep in her chest, in a place she had never looked before, was a fire. It was small, barely larger than a candle flame, but it was bright, hot, alive, and it was singing. The same song she had heard all her life in stones and rivers and abandoned places, but clearer now, stronger, recognizable as her own voice. She let it rise. Let it flow through her, down her arms, into Kael, into the mark, and the mark fought back. It was like pouring water onto hot coals, the hiss and steam and resistance. The mark didn't want to break. It had been placed by someone with power, with intention, with the full weight of their flame behind it. And it had been there for so long that it had become part of Kael, integrated into his very being. But Lyra's flame was patient. It didn't attack the mark. It didn't try to overwhelm it. Instead, it surrounded it, cradled it, warmed it slowly and steadily until the ice began to crack from within. The mark flared bright, blindingly bright, and Kael cried out. Lyra felt his pain, shared it, bore it with him. The mark was burning now, not with cold, but with heat, with the fire of breaking, of transformation. And then, with a sound like glass shattering, it fractured. The mark split down the middle, the two halves separating, and from the gap poured light. Not normal light, but something else, something that felt like memory and emotion and possibility all compressed into visible form. It flooded the chamber, washing over both of them, and Lyra felt Kael's history, his pain, his hope, all of it flowing into her. She saw his childhood in a palace made of white stone, where he was taught to hide what he was, to suppress the flame that marked him as different. She saw his teenage years, the growing awareness that he couldn't live the way they wanted, couldn't deny his nature forever. She saw the moment he chose exile over conformity, the look on his father's face when he made that choice. And she saw the punishment, the council of elders who decided that exile wasn't enough, that he needed to be contained, controlled, made into an example. She saw them place the mark, saw the frost begin to form, saw him trapped in his own body as consciousness remained, but all ability to move or speak or scream faded away. Decades of silence, of isolation, of calling out into the void, hoping someone, anyone, would hear, until she had. The light faded. The mark was gone, leaving only smooth skin where the scar had been, and Kael collapsed forward, his forehead resting against Lyra's shoulder, his body shaking with sobs or laughter or both. "Thank you," he gasped. "Thank you, thank you. I thought I would be there forever. I thought no one would ever hear, but you did. You heard me." Lyra held him, her own body trembling with exhaustion. The warmth was still there, but diminished, like a fire burned down to embers. She had given so much, pushed herself so far, that she could barely stand, but she had done it. She had freed him. "We need to leave," Kael said after a moment, pulling back, wiping his eyes. "If the mark is broken, they'll know. The ones who placed it. They'll come to investigate, to see if I've escaped. And if they find us here, they'll kill you and bind me again, or worse." "Where do we go?" Lyra asked. "I don't know. Somewhere far from here. Somewhere they won't think to look." He stood, testing his legs, and for a moment he swayed unsteady. But then he straightened, and Lyra saw strength return to him, saw the flame inside him beginning to wake now that the seal was broken. They left the chamber, stepping back out onto the plateau. The night was still dark, but dawn was approaching. the sky lightening at the edges. Lyra looked back at the ruins one last time, at the place where Kael had been imprisoned for so long, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "How long were you there?" she asked as they began to descend the mountain, retracing the path she had taken. "I don't know," Kael said. "Time became meaningless after the first few years. But based on the decay of the ruins, the way the forest has grown, I would guess at least a century. Maybe more." Lyra stumbled, and Kael caught her arm, steadying her. "A century," she repeated, unable to fully comprehend it. "You were aware for all of that?" "Yes, that was the point. The punishment was meant to be eternal torment. Death would have been mercy. This was revenge." They walked in silence for a while, picking their way through the forest as the sun began to rise, filtering through the canopy in shafts of golden light. Lyra's mind was racing. She had questions, so many questions, but she was too tired to articulate them. The effort of breaking the seal had drained her more than she realized, and each step felt like wading through deep water. "You need to rest," Kael said, noticing her struggle. "We'll find a place to stop, somewhere hidden. You can sleep while I keep watch." "I can't go back to the village," Lyra said. "If they're looking for you, if they come to Thornhaven asking questions, my parents would be in danger." "Then we won't go back," Kael said simply. "We'll go somewhere new, start over. I have nothing left of my old life anyway. It's been gone for longer than you've been alive." They found a small cave, barely more than an overhang, but it was dry and hidden by thick brush. Lyra collapsed onto the rocky ground, too exhausted to care about comfort. Kael sat at the entrance, his back to the wall, watching the forest with those silver eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Sleep," he said gently. "I'll wake you if there's danger." Lyra wanted to argue, to insist she could keep going, but her body had other ideas. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, deep and dreamless. When she woke, the sun was high overhead, streaming through gaps in the brush. She sat up, disoriented, her body aching in ways she'd never experienced before. Kael was still at the entrance, in the same position, looking like he hadn't moved at all. "Did you sleep?" Lyra asked, her voice rough. "No," Kael said. "I'm afraid to. After being frozen for so long, I'm afraid that if I close my eyes, I'll wake up back there, and all of this will have been a dream." Lyra understood. She moved to sit beside him, and together they looked out at the forest, the endless expanse of green, stretching in all directions. "What's your flame?" Kael asked after a moment. "Every bearer has a mark, a unique signature that defines what their fire can do. What's yours?" "I don't know," Lyra admitted. "I only just learned I had a flame at all. All my life I've heard things, sounds others couldn't hear. Voices and stones and water and wood. But I didn't know what it meant." "That's it," Kael said, and there was excitement in his voice for the first time. "That's your mark. You hear what others can't. You perceive the memories, the emotions, the histories embedded in the world around you. That's incredibly rare. Most bearers have flames that affect the external world, that change or destroy or create, but yours perceives. It understands, it listens. And yours?" Lyra asked. Kael was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know any more. It was sealed for so long I can barely feel it now. It's like trying to remember how to use a limb that's been numb for years. But before, when I was young, before they locked me away, I could influence cold, Not create it exactly, but shape it, direct it. I could freeze water with a touch, lower the temperature of a room, create frost in the air. They called it the winter mark, and they feared it. Why? Because cold is death. Or it can be. And they thought I would use it to hurt people, to conquer, to destroy. They didn't understand that I just wanted to be left alone, to explore what I could do without being judged or feared. So they made sure I could never explore it again. They sat in silence, two bearers who had found each other against impossible odds, both marked by their flames, both carrying wounds that would never fully heal. "What do we do now?" Lyra asked. "We survive," Kael said. "We move forward. We find other bearers, if there are any left. We build something new, something better than what came before. Or we find a quiet place far from civilization and live out our days in peace. I don't know. For the first time in a very long time, I have choices. And I have no idea which one to make." "Then we'll figure it out together," Lyra said, and reached for his hand. He took it, and this time the warmth that flowed between them was gentle, balanced, not draining her or overwhelming him. Just a connection, a recognition, two flames acknowledging each other. Over the following days they traveled south and east, moving through forests and across plains, avoiding settlements and roads, staying hidden. Kael was slowly regaining his strength, his flame beginning to wake from its long suppression. Lyra could see the change in him, the way he moved with increasing confidence, the way his eyes grew brighter, more present, more fully alive with each passing day. But the recovery wasn't linear. Some mornings Kael would wake disoriented, convinced he was still frozen, still trapped, and it would take Lyra several minutes to calm him, to remind him that he was free, that the seal was broken, that they were moving forward together. Other times he would become overwhelmed by simple things, the feel of wind on his face, the taste of water from a stream, the scent of pine needles crushed underfoot. Things he had been denied for so long that experiencing them again was almost painful in its intensity. Lyra learned to be patient with these moments, to give him space when he needed it and companionship when he didn't. She was learning about her own flame, too, discovering its capabilities and limits through trial and practice. Now that she knew what the sounds were, now that she understood they were manifestations of her bearer mark, she could listen more intentionally, more deeply. She could hear the history of the land they walked through, the battles fought and loves consummated and deaths endured, all of it compressed into the soil and stone and trees. One night they camped near an ancient oak, and Lyra placed her hand against its bark and heard its story. 300 years of growth, of seasons passing, of storms weathered. She heard the children who had played in its branches, the lovers who had carved their names into its trunk, the old man who had died peacefully beneath its shade. The tree was a library, and her flame could read it. She also discovered she could hear bearers from a distance, their flames singing a frequency different from normal people, distinct and recognizable. It was how she knew they weren't being followed in those early days, how she could tell when they were approaching a settlement and needed to detour around it. Each bearer's flame had its own signature, its own voice, and Lyra was learning to distinguish between them. Kael taught her what he knew about bearers, knowledge that had been passed down through generations before his imprisonment. He told her about the different marks, the categories that flames tended to fall into. Physical marks like his cold or fire or strength. Perceptual marks like Lyra's hearing, or vision that could see through objects, or touch that could read emotions. Transformative marks that could change one thing into another. Creative marks that could make something from nothing. But the categories are just approximations, he explained one evening as they sat by their fire, his hands extended toward the flames not for warmth, but for the simple joy of being able to feel heat from an external source. Every bearer is unique. Your mark might be hearing, but the way you hear, what you hear, how you interpret what you hear, that's all uniquely yours. Two bearers could have the same basic mark and use it in completely different ways. What was yours like? Lyra asked. Before they sealed it? Kael was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Cold, yes, but more than that. Preservation. I could freeze things, but not to destroy them. To protect them. To keep them exactly as they were, unchanged by time or decay. I once froze a flower my mother gave me, kept it perfect for years. I could freeze water to create bridges where there were none, freeze rain before it hit the ground, create sculptures from ice that would last as long as the temperature stayed low. It sounds beautiful, Lyra said softly. It was, but others saw it as dangerous, because what preserves can also imprison. What protects can also trap. They looked at my mark and saw a weapon, a tool for controlling people, for freezing enemies mid-battle, for creating prisons more secure than any cell. They didn't understand that I had no interest in warfare or conquest. I just wanted to create, to explore, to understand the limits of what I could do. And they took that from you, Lyra said, anger flaring in her chest. They tried. They sealed the flame, yes, but they couldn't take away what I'd already learned, what I'd already become. That stays with you, even when you can't access the power. It's like being a musician who loses their hands. The music is still in you. You just can't express it. Can you feel it now? Lyra asked. The flame? Is it coming back? Kael closed his eyes, concentrating. When he opened them again, there was wonder in his face. Yes, it's faint, weak, like a candle in a storm. But it's there, growing stronger every day. Breaking the seal didn't restore it immediately, but it allowed it to begin recovering. Given time, it might return to what it was, or become something new. They traveled for weeks, slowly making their way toward lands neither of them knew. Lyra had no destination in mind, just a vague sense that they needed to move away from the ruins, away from the kingdom that had imprisoned Kael, toward something new. Kael followed willingly, trusting her instincts, grateful to be moving at all after so long being still. Along the way they encountered other bearers. The first was a woman living alone in a cottage deep in the forest, so far from any settlement that Lyra almost missed her. But she heard the woman's flame, singing a lonely song of isolation and fear. They approached carefully, not wanting to frighten her, and when they knocked on her door, she opened it with a knife in her hand and terror in her eyes. "We're not here to hurt you," Lyra said quickly, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. "We're like you. We're bearers." The woman, whose name was Elena, stared at them for a long moment. Then she lowered the knife and began to cry. "I thought I was the only one," she said between sobs. "I thought everyone else had been killed or captured. I've been hiding here for 15 years, too afraid to leave, too afraid to use my flame for anything, even things that would make life easier. They stayed with Elena for 3 days, talking, sharing stories, showing her that she wasn't alone. Her mark was growth, the ability to encourage plants to flourish, to grow faster and stronger than they would naturally. She had been using it in secret to cultivate her garden, but always afraid someone would notice, would realize what she was, would report her to authorities. There are others, Lyra told her, scattered, hiding, afraid, but they exist. And someday maybe we can bring them together, create a place where bearers don't have to hide. Elena looked at her with hope that was painful to witness, so fragile it seemed it might shatter. Do you really think that's possible? I have to, Lyra said, because the alternative is spending our entire lives afraid, and that's not living. That's just surviving. When they left, Elena gave them seeds from her garden, wrapped carefully in cloth. Plant these when you find your place, she said, and think of me. And remember that someone else is out there, hoping you succeed. They found other bearers after that. A man who could sense emotions from touch, living as a hermit, because the constant bombardment of feelings from others was overwhelming. A young girl, barely 12, whose mark was light, who had been hidden by her parents in a cellar because they were terrified of what would happen if anyone discovered her gift. An old man who could see threads of probability, possible futures branching out from every choice, who had gone half mad from the visions. Kael and Lyra would find them, guided by Lyra's ability to hear the songs of their flames, and they would talk to them, share their stories, show them they weren't alone. Some were grateful, eager to learn, to understand what they had been carrying all their lives. They would cry with relief, hug Lyra and Kael like family, ask 1,000 questions about what it meant to be a bearer, what they could do with their marks, whether there was any hope for a future where they didn't have to hide. Others were frightened, angry even, insisting they wanted nothing to do with flames or bearers or any of it. They had built lives around suppression, around pretending they were normal, and the suggestion that they could be anything else threatened the fragile equilibrium they had achieved. Kael and Lyra didn't push these wands. They simply planted seeds, left information about where they might be going, made it clear that if these people ever changed their minds, they weren't alone, there were others who understood, and slowly something began to grow. Not a movement, not yet, but a network, connections between bearers who had thought themselves isolated, whispers of a place where they might gather, where they might be safe, where they might finally be themselves without fear or shame. The beginning of something that might, one day, change everything. As months passed, Lyra and Kael grew closer, not romantically, though there was affection between them, but as true companions bonded by shared experience and mutual understanding. They knew each other's wounds, had seen each other at their weakest, had trusted each other with truths they'd never told anyone else. Kael told Lyra about his childhood in the palace, about being raised to deny his own nature, to see his flame as a curse rather than a gift. He told her about the isolation of being the only bearer in a family of non-bearers, of having no one who understood what he was experiencing, no one who could teach him or guide him. He told her about the moment he realized he couldn't live the lie anymore, couldn't spend his entire life pretending to be something he wasn't, and the terrible price he'd paid for that honesty. Lyra told Kael about growing up hearing things others couldn't, about being called strange and difficult, about her mother's shame and her father's quiet acceptance. She told him about the loneliness of having a gift no one acknowledged, of questioning her own sanity, because what she experienced didn't match what others told her was real. She told him about the years of silence, of learning to keep her gift hidden, of feeling like she was betraying herself every time she pretended not to hear what she heard. "We're both survivors," Kael said one night as they lay on opposite sides of their fire, looking up at stars that seemed impossibly bright and distant. "We survived our families, our cultures, our own doubts. We survived isolation and fear and the constant pressure to be something we're not. That's no small thing. Do you think we'll ever stop surviving and start actually living?" Lyra asked. "I think we already are," Kael replied. "Maybe not the lives we imagined, maybe not the lives others wanted for us, but we're here. We're free. We're finding others like us. That's living. That's more living than I did in all my years before the seal, even when I had wealth and position and a kingdom that should have been mine." One evening, months after Lyra had first followed the Howl into the night, they stood on a cliff, overlooking a valley bathed in the golden light of sunset. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold and deep purple. Below them, a river wound through the landscape like a silver ribbon, its song reaching Lyra's ears, telling her stories of its journey from mountain spring to distant ocean. "This could be it," Kael said quietly, his voice filled with something Lyra had never heard from him before. "Not just hope, but certainty. The place we make our own. Look at it. Water for drinking and irrigation, good land that could be cultivated, protection from the mountains on 3 sides, forest for building materials. We could build something here. Not a kingdom, nothing so grand or formal, just a refuge, a sanctuary, a place where bearers could come and be themselves without fear or judgment." Lyra looked out at the valley, and in her mind's eye, aided by her flame, she could see more than what was there. She could see potential, possibility, the echo of what might be. Houses dotting the landscape, built with care and purpose. Fields planted and tended by burrs whose marks enhanced growth. People moving about their days, their flames visible and celebrated rather than hidden and suppressed. Children growing up knowing what they were, being taught to embrace their gifts rather than fear them. A community built on acceptance, on the revolutionary idea that being different wasn't a curse but simply another way of being human. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady, certain. "This could be home." Kael took her hand, and she felt the warmth flow between them, balanced and beautiful. His mark, the frozen curse that had bound him for so long, was completely gone now, replaced by new purpose, new hope. And her mark, the ability to hear what others couldn't, had grown stronger, more refined, allowing her to perceive not just the past, but the potential future, the echoes of what might be. "We'll need help," Kael said practically. "We can't build a refuge alone. We'll need other bearers willing to work with us, willing to risk safety for community. They'll come," Lyra said with certainty. "I can hear them out there scattered across the world, lonely, afraid, longing for connection. When they learn there's a place they can go, when they hear that there are others like them, they'll come." And they did, slowly at first. A bearer here, a bearer there, drawn by rumor and hope. They came with stories of persecution, of hiding, of lives lived in the shadows. And Kael and Lyra welcomed them all, listened to them all, helped them begin to heal. The first to arrive was a woman named Thea, middle-aged and weathered, her hands calloused from years of hard labor. Her mark was stone-shaping, the ability to touch rock and reshape it with her will, molding it like clay with nothing but thought and intention. She had been living in a quarry, working as a common laborer, using her gift only in secret, only when no one was watching, always terrified someone would notice the way stones moved differently under her touch. "I can make walls," she said simply when she arrived, looking around the empty valley with eyes that had forgotten how to hope, "and floors, and foundations, whatever you need. Just show me where you want them, and I'll make them real." With Thea's help, the first structures began to rise from the earth itself, walls that grew organically from bedrock, smooth and strong, foundations that would last centuries. Simple shelters at first, just basic protection against wind and rain. But with each one, Thea grew more confident, more willing to experiment, more able to express the artistry she had suppressed for decades. Soon she was creating buildings that were not just functional, but beautiful, with flowing lines and unexpected grace, structures that seemed to grow from the land rather than being imposed upon it. As more bearers arrived, each bringing their own marks and skills, the settlement grew more sophisticated. A man named Darian came, young and eager, whose flame enhanced growth in plants. He took the seeds Elena had given them and planted them with reverence, speaking to them as he worked, encouraging them, and within weeks they had gardens producing food in abundance. Vegetables grew larger and sweeter than they had any right to. Grains ripened faster. Fruit trees that should have taken years to bear began producing within months. Darian taught others how to work with the land, how to listen to what the soil needed, how to partner with plants rather than simply commanding them. He established crop rotations that would keep the soil healthy. He created orchards that would feed the settlement for generations. And he did it all with a joy that was infectious, with a love for growing things that reminded everyone why their flames were gifts rather than curses. A young woman named Lyra arrived, barely 18, with a mark that was light itself. She could create illumination from nothing, could banish darkness with a thought, could make the night as bright as day if she chose. But she had learned subtlety during her years in hiding, had learned that sometimes the most beautiful light was the gentlest. She lit the settlement at night with soft, warm glows that made everything feel safe and welcoming. She created pathways marked by gentle luminescence, so no one would stumble in the dark. And she discovered that she could shape light into different colors, painting the night sky with aurora-like displays that made people stop their work and stare and wonder. More came, each one adding to the tapestry of the community. A man whose mark was temperature, who could warm cold spaces and cool hot ones with equal ease, making every home comfortable, regardless of weather. An older bearer whose flame was memory, perfect and complete recall of everything she had ever experienced, who became the settlement's historian and teacher, preserving their stories for future generations. A child whose mark was sound, who filled the air with music that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The refuge grew. Buildings rose in the valley, simple at first, but becoming more refined, as bearers with different marks contributed their skills, their knowledge, their creativity. Gardens flourished in ways that seemed impossible. Light danced through the streets. Music filled the air. And slowly, carefully, people who had spent their lives hiding began to open, to trust, to believe they might actually be safe. And Lyra listened to it all. She walked through the growing settlement and heard its song, the harmony of dozens of flames working together, creating something beautiful from what had been empty land. She heard the hope in people's voices when they talked about the future. She heard the healing in their laughter when they shared meals together. She heard the slow, tentative building of trust between people who had never dared trust before, who had spent their entire lives afraid of being betrayed or exposed or destroyed for what they were. Kael found his flame again, truly found it, and learned that it was more than cold, more than simply freezing. It was preservation in its purest form, the ability to keep things unchanged, to protect them from decay and time and the inevitable entropy that claimed all things. He used it to preserve food through long winters, keeping harvests fresh for months without spoilage. He used it to keep water clean and pure, preventing contamination. He used it to maintain the integrity of buildings against the elements, slowing the weathering process so that what they built would last for generations. His mark, once feared as an instrument of death and imprisonment, became a tool of life and continuity. And he taught younger bearers, those who were still learning what their flames could do, that power itself was neutral. What mattered was intention, was choice, was the decision to create rather than destroy, to protect rather than harm, to serve rather than dominate. One day, a year after they had founded the refuge, a messenger arrived. A young man exhausted from travel with news from the north. The kingdom that had imprisoned Kael, the one that had feared bearers above all else, was collapsing. The king, Kael's father, had died. His successors, all of them non-bearers, had torn the kingdom apart fighting over succession. Civil war had broken out. The people were suffering. "They want you to come back," the messenger said, addressing Kael. "The nobles who still remember you. They think you could bring order, could unite the factions. They're asking for your return." Kael listened in silence. Then he looked at Lyra, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him wanted to go, to reclaim what had been taken from him, to show them all that they had been wrong about him. But another part, the stronger part, knew that returning would mean leaving this behind. The refuge, the people who depended on them, the life they were building. "Tell them I'm honored," Kael said finally. "But I have a kingdom already. It's here. It's small, and it's new, and it's imperfect. But it's mine, and I'm not leaving it." The messenger looked surprised, but he nodded and departed. Lyra moved to stand beside Kael. "No regrets?" she asked. "None," he said firmly. "I chose exile once because I refused to deny what I was. And I choose it again now for the same reason. This is who I am. This is where I belong. Not on a throne in a palace that hates me, but here with people who understand me. With you." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You followed my howl into the night when no one else would. You broke the seal when you could have walked away. You gave me warmth when I had been cold for longer than I can measure. I owe you everything, more than everything, my life, my freedom, my future. All of it. You don't owe me anything," Lyra said. "I followed the howl because I had to, because ignoring it would have been like ignoring my own heartbeat. We found each other because we were meant to. Because our flames recognized each other, because the world needed us to be together." Kael smiled, and it was a real smile, full of warmth and life. Then let's build this world together. Let's make it a place where no bearer has to howl alone in the dark, where no one has to hide what they are. Let's make it a place where warmth is freely given and gratefully received." Lyra nodded and felt her own flames sing in response, harmonizing with his, creating something beautiful. The refuge continued to grow. Years passed. More bearers came, and with them came their stories, their wounds, their flames. Kael and Lyra welcomed them all, building a community founded on acceptance, on the celebration of difference rather than the fear of it. And sometimes on cold nights when the wind blew from the north, Lyra would stand at the edge of the settlement and listen, not for the howl anymore. That had been answered, had been silenced in the best way possible, not through suppression, but through connection. Instead, she listened for other sounds, other bearers calling out in loneliness, other voices that needed to be heard. And when she heard them, she would send others to follow the sound, to bring them home. Because that's what the refuge was, home, for all those who had been lost, all those who had been alone, all those who had thought their flames were curses rather than gifts. The frozen mark had warmed. The howl had been answered, and in its place grew something that would outlast any kingdom, any empire, any throne. A community built on fire and warmth and the simple, revolutionary act of being seen. If this story touched something inside you, if you felt the warmth that Lyra and Kael shared, leave your mark here. A comment, a like, a subscription. Each gesture is a link in this invisible chain that binds us, because you also carry a flame, and someone somewhere is listening for your howl.